comes down to that. It just feels better. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
you know, you think about what's happening in the music industry. We don't really have a record industry as we knew it anymore. More and more audiences are tuned into streaming. You think it's the best of times and the worst of times because now I can access just about any type of music at my fingertips, yet maybe I'm losing out on that traditional album experience where you, like when we were all growing up, where you listened to an album and you wore it out. What do you think? I mean, are we better off now, or do we have to balance the two?
Yeah, that's the big question. I mean, I kind of base it on what I see my students dealing with. You know, that's most of my connection with the younger people. So it's both. Like you said, I think there's a beautiful opportunity to see people on YouTube play, which I mean, I remember, or even like when I was in like when I first went to Japan when I was in my 20s and used to go to this video shop, like this bootleg video shop.
Yeah, sure. Right. The Japanese. Yeah.
Gather all these videos, like people had never seen, it was an amazing thing. Now it's like, it's all on YouTube. Right. So, but there's this burden of information too that these younger people are dealing with, and I think there's a certain anxiety, right, of like, oh, I gotta know how to play like Jamerson, I gotta know how to play like Jocko, I mean, like Kachow and like whatever, it's like all this stuff, and it might force a lot of people to move on too quick, right? Like they say, okay, I got that. Now what's next? I got that. What's next? Like you said, where we would sit with one record for a few weeks or a month or more and wear it out. I mean, I did that less than people older than me. So, it's like for them, I probably, skirted by some stuff too. So it's always like looking back and thinking it was better. But it's a mix. I think it puts a bit more pressure on how we take in information, and make sure that we are as thorough as we can be and not feel this pressure of moving through it all too quickly. Because it's all, that's the thing. It's like, I didn't know how to play like Cuban music when I came to New York at all, and then I started playing with Danilo Perez, and he would show me, listen to Kachow, listen to these great recordings, and I soaked it up, but I didn't master it at all. I was just like kind of pragmatically getting it together so that I can do it on the gig. And, so you don't have to master everything, but you have to kind of get a sense of what the style is, what it's coming out of, what's the essence of that, what's the big, but like I said, it's kind of the bass is doing the same thing, might have a different rhythmic thing, but its approach is very similar. So that's really helpful.
Yeah, it's like the folks that listen to bebop and avant-garde and this, that, and the other thing, as long as they have the feel and they can sort of replicate, they don't have to be an X musician or a Y musician. They can be a player who can play in any musical situation confidently.
Exactly. And be listening. I mean, a number one thing is listening, right? Once you can play your instrument, it's like, are you listening to what's going on around you to affect it in a meaningful way? And, I think this is kind of the thing that gets lost in jazz education or in music education, is that it's like, okay, you do this, like checking off a list.
Yeah.
At the end of that list, okay, now I'm cool, but as a bass player, that if you're not really tuned into what the band needs as it shifts in the middle of the song, then you're probably not going to get called again. So it all comes down to listening and to making good decisions in the moment.
So before we start talking about some of your other recordings, I was curious, and I'm sure Tom is as well, what are you listening to now?
Let's see. What do I have out there? I've been listening to Art Tatum, which I always knew Art Tatum, of course, but been just kind of going deep into Art Tatum. A lot of classical music that I never heard. Like with classical music, there's so much I've missed. Even with like even really popular people like Ravel or something, but also newer composers that I had not known about. contemporary classical composers. What else? I don't know. It's like every day it's a little different, but then sometimes I'm not really listening that much. I might be practicing more than I'm listening, or it really varies. And then like I mentioned Delaney and Bonnie. Like that's a group that I knew the musicians more than the group.
Carl Radel.
Yeah,
Carl
who I
Radel.
think Carl Radel is an unbelievable bass player. Right?
Yeah.
And Keltner and all. I mean, it's just like a real powerful moment that I think the British musicians kind of saw how great it was even before the Americans did.
And they gave it back to us.
Right? So it all comes around, right? So it's funny with me. Like I have not with so much with jazz, but with other music, I have holes that I'm still trying to fill up and see. Oh yeah, that connects with that, or going backwards and forwards.
Cool. Well, let's chat about a few of the things. I love how, once again, it's an ECM recording, and once again, the sound is just fantastic.
Oh, when we get onto ECM, can we just comment on how wonderful their album covers are? The artwork. I mean, they're works of art. I mean, really.
Yeah. I mean, this is the whole aesthetic of Manfred. It's like the whole thing is connected, right? The way it looks, the way it sounds, choice of
Oh, it's a very Blue Note oriented.
Yeah.
Think about how wonderful their covers are, and think about how small they are on CD.
Unfortunately, right? This is a drawback to CDs. Yeah, but luckily, ECM puts out a lot of stuff on vinyl still.
Yes, they do.
Right?
Yeah.
I think there is also a book of their album covers.
Yes.
I think there is. Yeah. Yeah, it's a certain aesthetic. You can tell them right away, right? Which is really important. A lot of people have copped it though, but yeah, they just started that. But also, the thing with Manfred also is with, he's a very, very much a visionary, but the way he doesn't really say so much while you're recording necessarily. He has more of a hand, I would say, in general at the mix of finding this way to mix very quickly, very kind of off the cuff, but finds it really quick. And also with programming, like the order of tunes, he's really good at that. Sequencing,
yeah.
So that was really helpful for me. The mix was really interesting because I had recorded the Gleaners in New York, but I happened to mix it in France, and with Manfred in a different studio. And we did. I think we started at 9 in the morning and we were done by 12:30 or something. Like super fast. Even for
only
solo,
a bass.
Right. So it's kind of what what people might be surprised at with him is that it's really kind of jazzy in that way. It's like kind of go with your instincts, but
in the moment.
But he has such good instincts, it works.
That helps.
Well, think about what is it? Colors of Chloe, the first Everhard Weber record.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a unique sound, distinct sound. Yeah.
Hey, do you use effects at all?
I don't. I'm not against it. I just haven't really checked it out enough to use it.
Well, let me know, because I have a few boutique pedal companies that I'm doing reviews on, and I'm sure they'd love to, send you something to experiment
I'd be curious. It's the whole thing with the upright. It's for to work, I guess. In a good way. But I'd be open to it because I'm not a purist in that way.
Yeah.
Other ways.
Okay. So let's talk about Father and Son.
Oh yeah, Wolfgang. Yeah. So Wolfgang, I had met in 1990 when I was playing with Gary Burton for a year. I moved to Boston to play with Gary. My friend Donnie McCaslin, who was playing saxophone, told me that Gary was looking for a bass player, so I went out there, and so I met Wolfgang. He was playing with Gary that year, and we just kind of connected, and we started to play. Once we both left Gary, I guess in '91, and he started kind of his solo career going, and so we were playing a lot in Europe at that time. So I'd been playing with him since '90. since 1990, and I've always appreciated his compositions and his just way of kind of like, he's another guy who's very much influenced by classical music and brought that into his composing. So he's kind of connected in that way. And then these records for ECM, you know, he kind of put together kind of an all-star band, you know, for those with Brad and Brian Blade and Ambrose Akamusir. You know, so it was just very another one of those things where you go into the studio, it sounds good right away. It's like you can't really mess it up because it's all cool. Like even if you mess it up, it ends up sounding good, you know.
And I guess Ambrose was at the beginning of his career at that time too, right?
Well, somewhat. I mean, he started quite young, so he was already, you know, he was making his own records and stuff. But you know, he's still a young guy, I guess. Actually, you know, younger than us. So
Isn't everybody?
yeah, now it is, right? Amazing, right? I was always the youngest guy in the band. Never, almost never now.
Yep. I can say I'm the oldest one in my house, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
Although my Newfoundland is 13, so he's about 91. So I think.
Yeah, but Wolfgang, yeah, that was a fun record, and we, you know, it was kind of the typical thing where we did, I think, maybe 3 or 4 gigs, and then went to the studio from there. We were in Europe and went down to south of France, and yeah, I mean, ECM records are really pretty typical, maybe like Blue Note was, you know, where you do 2 days of recording, you mix one day, it's done. It's very, very fast. So, which I like.
I guess back then that was done more economically than for any other reason.
Yeah.
Meaning the Blue Note.
Yeah, I think they did have 1 or 2 rehearsals too, which was kind of unique at that time. Like they had paid rehearsals even back then. Yeah, I mean it's still economic now, you know.
Sure.
You know? Yeah, but you know, 2 days is usually enough. You know, the music, if it's not too hard, and you know, I mean that's why a lot of times you go in and you never play with anybody, and you go and do a record in a day or two. It can work. But I think, you know, it's best when the repertoire reflects the time that you have. You know, like I don't like it when somebody comes in when you know you have 1 day to record, and somebody comes in with really hard material, because then it's just like, okay, we'll get it together, but just barely. You know, I'd rather that the material reflects or has an awareness of the time constraints.
Cool. Tom, do you have any songs you'd like to?
Joshua Redmond. Let's talk about the Joshua Redmond. Hitchhiker's Guide. Hitchhiker's Guide we're going to play.
Hitchhiker's Guide. Am I on that? Maybe. You know, there's some records on Josh that there might be more than one bass player.
Okay.
No, I think
anyway,
you're on that.
Okay. Josh was another guy that I met that year in Boston when I lived in Boston in 1990. He was going to Harvard, and I wasn't going to Berkeley, but I was hanging at Berkeley a lot and met a lot of great musicians in that 9-month period. And Josh was coming over to play a lot, and it's like, man, this guy, he's got it all together, and he's not even planning on becoming a musician. You know, he was kind of heading down another path. Then we both moved to New York around the same time the next year.
Okay.
And, you know, he figured out what he wanted to do. But, yeah, I was always just amazed by his command of the instrument and rhythm, like right away. It was so strong, like so definitive. And so, yeah, got to play with Josh a lot, did a lot of records and gigs and tours. And I had met Brad around the same time. I think it was around this time we did this 1 week at the Village Gate where we played as a trio for the first time. But then I think like the next week we went to Europe with Josh and Brian Blade. So I got the chance to kind of tour and play with him every night, play with Brad every night for a few weeks. And so it's just kind of this coming together of like basically contemporary, same age. We're all roughly the same age, you know. And for me, that was kind of a unique thing because back when I was playing in San Francisco, I was typically playing with older musicians,
Right.
much older than me. So that shift was really an educational turning point for me of learning from my contemporaries, which I think is so important. And it kind of brings up something I think is interesting. You know, when people ask about influences, we always typically mention people older than us, you know, or dead people. But you know, influences are also our contemporaries. You know,
Absolutely.
You know, and we maybe more so in a way. You know, what we learned, whether they're some people we play with or other bass players that I hung with in New York early on. You know, so that's kind of maybe not discussed enough is how much we learn from the people our same similar age.
Yeah.
I think, you know, with the jazz tradition, that's probably very, very true. Oh, go work with this guy. Go let's talk to this guy. They've done this. They've done that. But your contemporaries, they grew up with the same stuff you did, so they're kind of working on the same thing.
Exactly. Our references are really compatible. You know what we're referencing, and yeah, it's just, you know, I think about maybe even more so what I've learned from people my age.
Well, it's interesting. I remember Fly. I think you guys did a killer version of Spanish Castle Magic.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, right. You know, and for me and Jeff, because I've known Jeff since I was 15, I think.
Yeah.
And then when we were both out in San Francisco, we used to play together all the time, and you know, we used to listen to a lot of music together. You know,
Sure.
like in the car, at home, whatever. And Jimmy was one of those, you know, one of those guys that we listened to a lot. And so yeah, it's like, oh, let's take a tune that we at least listen to, you know, that's not from our really tradition of jazz, but definitely connected, you know.
Yeah.
That's the thing. All of us, you know, it'd be interesting to meet somebody now, a younger person who hasn't heard, you know, popular music from the 50s, 60s, 70s. And, you know, it's like we're all hearing the same shit now, you know, and that's part of this kind of shuffle, iPad shuffle generation. You know,
Right.
It's all cool. You know, it's all we can relate and access it, and I think that's a healthy thing, right? We're not pigeonholing it by genre as much.
Yeah. Well, Spotify playlists will do that. They'll play Jimmy and they'll play Cardi B back to back. So there is there is some value in that.
I think there's something really good about that. And like I was saying about bass, it's like, okay, what's the bass doing in each of those two? If there's bass on Cardi B.
Yeah, I was just gonna say
there's no bass on it. Well, you know, you could that's how you would do a jazz interpretation of that. You would apply bass to it. You know, you could. You know.
But you know, I have this thing about like how I hear how the bass in the mix has changed over the years. You know, like if you listen to Jamerson or Motown, the bass is really on top. You know, the drums are back, and then 10 years later, drums are getting more on top, and the bass starts to get, you know, and I attribute it mostly to the songs. You know, those Motown songs had such great harmony. The bass was needed to help show that movement.
Right.
As tunes became a lot less harmonically sophisticated, you almost don't need bass, because you got drums maintaining the rhythmic thing, and then
there's nothing to outline.
Yeah. So you know, I think that's part of why the bass seems to kind of fade back in the 80s. You know, maybe after disco. You know, even though disco wasn't harmonically that inventive, still the bass was really very present.
Well, when we spoke to Freebo yesterday, it was funny. There was a hip hop version of a track he played on Midnight at the Oasis. Remember that standard?
Of course.
And one of the elements they took was his bass part, and it turned it into a hip hop. You know, it turned it into a hip hop groove, actually.
And then there's, you know, still, you know, people writing great tunes. You know,
sure there are. Yeah.
You know, and when early when I was in New York, I did a record with D'Angelo, his first record I played on.
Oh, okay.
And when I heard his stuff, I was like, oh my God, this is a guy who's got everything together, you know, harmonically, rhythmically, piano playing, singing, you know. I mean, it was just a no-brainer that this guy was going to be huge, you know. But like to play bass on that stuff is really like playing with Stevie Wonder or with Donny Hathaway or something.
Look at Pino when he did that record with D'Angelo. He brought the Fender bass back because Pino just got an old Fender bass with frets on it, and just did this greasy Jamerson, Jamal, Chuck Rainey thing, and all of a sudden people went, "Hey, What's
Yeah.
that? That's a Fender bass. That sounds pretty good.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. It was the right moment, right
Yeah.
time, right, and the right player, of course. Yeah.
Right. And I think David, I think he also caused that's when vintage Fenders now cost a fortune.
Expensive.
Yeah.
He pushed the price up.
Instead of going to We Buy Guitars and picking up a $400 bass, now that became a $4,000 bass.
Right, you went to the Rebuy Mortgage Company to see. Can I refinance my house? I need a P bass.
Right.
Well, you know, another funny thing is a friend of mine used to be the guitar player. If they're still together, his name's Alex Skolnick.
Oh.
Band's called Testament. It's a real super heavy metal band.
Right.
However, he studied at the New School Jazz program, and it has a trio, and they're doing things like Welcome to the Jungle and stuff like that as jazz tunes. It's clever. I don't know if you'll ever hear it on a radio or even in an elevator 20 years from now, but it's interesting how that goes.
I mean, jazz has always fed off of everything, right? It's always eaten up everything in its path, and it's not surprising that we go into that realm of music too. It just I don't like it when it's kind of kitschy, you know, like it has to me. You want to take the best elements of all of it, you know, and kind of find a way to unite it. So I think it takes some thought, you know. It's not just, you know, you want some harmonic content for sure, but it takes some thought. We can't just grab anything. So thought has to go into it. Care.
Yeah. So a couple more songs. I'd like to sort of put your trio recording, the tune Ode, which is just fabulous. And then we can segue into when Pat Metheny joined in and you did the song Toward the Light. How's that?
Right. So let me think back. So, well, first of all, Ode to me is an amazing composition. And I think, you know, Brad has written some tunes that are really standards, you know. They could be classified as standards, you know, and I'm sure they will be thought of as such in years to come. Just really a unique fingerprint on composition to me that's brought in pop music, classical music, and jazz. Found that his unique voice through that. And Ode, I think, is a great example of that. Kind of a pop tune, but with a lot of harmony. The harmony is actually quite moving. And it's also one of those tunes, like with Brad, you know, we've been playing so long, and he's written so many tunes that over the years, what we've done touring-wise is kind of always been doing new material, you know, as he writes it. And in the last few years, we've been talking more about, let's bring in some of the older tunes, you know, let's play some of those tunes that we played at the beginning or the middle and just reinterpret them as we are now. And that's one of them that we were playing up until the pandemic. But so it's kind of neat to do that too, to see like how we would play them now, maybe 10 years later or whatever. So, and then with Pat, I had been playing trio with Pat. Let's see, that would have been you know, late '90s, off and on, you know, through that time. And then you know, Pat was a big fan of Brad's and knew his playing really well, loved his playing. And Brad was one of the first, I think, records he ever heard was Travels of Pat's, and so there was definitely a musical admiration on going both directions, and so it just seemed like the right thing of collaborating as a trio with Pat, you know. And so I remember that recording really well because my wife Rebecca was like, I don't know, 8 months pregnant. No, wait a second, she was like really pregnant, like any day pregnant. And I was going back and forth into the city to record. I was like, oh, I hope I get back in time, you know. So there's a bit of anxiety, actually, added anxiety for me to do that record. But what else do I also remember that we did it in the studio that's no longer there on the far, in Midtown, but on the far west side. It was Right Track Studio.
Oh, sure.
They had a couple studios, but this was one way on the west side. And it was I had never been in such a huge studio. It was like you had to almost get a golf cart to go from one end to the other. And, so sonically it had to sing. And so, we weren't really that close, it was kind of a weird setup because it was such a huge room.
Gotcha.
So it was one of those things like, I hope this works, I hope this kind of ends up sounding like it's coming together. And I think it does. But then, then we went and toured for a nice big chunk of time after that, and got to play a lot of that music together live and to broaden it, to expand on it. And whoops, sorry, hang on one sec. Do this. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. Hang on one sec.
There's probably millions of people on Zoom at the moment.
Okay. My AirPods died. To play that music live, like anything, it's like it just always gets better. It gets more open, and we also just playing with each other. We figured out how to take it deep, to go to a deeper place. And it's funny because I was thinking, wow, it would be so great to do it again now, whatever it's been, like 15 years later, So hopefully that could be something that we could get to some more and see what develops.
Well, I'll tell you, this morning we went out to get coffee and I had Odon in the car, and my wife was going, that reminds me of a Stevie Wonder tune. Harmonically.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful tune. And actually, Rebecca wrote some lyrics to it, and we've recorded it too and played it. So it's kind of a pop tune actually, but harmonically it's pretty inventive. And also just the way he arranged the layering of the bass is kind of out, and then it kind of joins in with the melody, and it's got really a different setting for it. And yeah, Brad's an amazing composer.
Yeah, great. Tom,
have we gone through all the tunes? Have we talked about Ethan Iverson?
David Sanchez.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, David I met through Danilo. This is really early when I just come into town, and I met Danilo kind of also at the Village Gate, doing a week with him at the Village Gate, one of those great clubs where you could do that even if you weren't that well known at the time. And so we started touring, and I learned a lot about Afro-Cuban music from those guys. Danilo's from Panama and David's from Puerto Rico. Just the strong rhythmic connection to the music was really impressive. And then at some point, David started doing his own records, and I did some touring with him too. Sometimes with Brad, would be on piano. I don't remember that specific record, but David to me is one of those guys who figured out kind of like, because they played with Dizzy really early on for both those guys, they learned kind of what the theme of this conversation is about, how everything's related, and how jazz has taken so much from Afro-Cuban music at some points, and Dizzy was just, kind of the beginning of that. And so that was a really inherent part of their playing, which I didn't really have. So I was kind of trying to soak it up from them, even they wanted me to have that knowledge, but they also wanted me to play like a jazz bass player. They didn't want, a Latin bass player specifically. They want somebody who had that knowledge, but played it more like a jazz bass player. So I was just trying to find that blend so that I wasn't dismissing what it was coming from, but I also wasn't trying to lose my own identity in it as well.
Well, it's a great record. I really like the tune we picked, Mal's Social. So hopefully the audience will like that too. Good.
Yeah, these are, you're going back a ways. It's some, it's like I remember a lot of records. I remember pretty much most of them, but it gets a little tricky at this point. It's like almost 30 years ago.
Sure. I just wanted to give sort of an introduction to our audience, because our audience is pretty well, rock people and R&B folks. And I just want to make certain that everyone understands how important
Right.
you do and what jazz does
I appreciate that. You
is
know,
part of it.
it's probably clear, but the tune I wrote for Fly called JJ is a dedication to Jared Jamal. And
Oh,
Oh, all right. Well, we will change that then.
okay, yeah, to me, like I was always into Jared Jamal, but I was listening to this record he did with BB King, alive and well, right?
oh,
Yeah.
sure, classic, yeah.
Yeah, and just that way of playing to me, like, okay, how do I get that? How do I kind of get into that a little bit on the upright? And so that song came out of Jamal for sure. So there's always these connections.
There's only one last tune, and I'm a big Sinatra fan. So when you were playing with Ethan Iverson, you did What's New.
Okay,
And that's a great tune. It's a
that's
great tune.
classic. I mean, if you want to learn standards, go to Frank Sinatra, right? I mean, because he covered all the great ones, and also, I don't remember what key he played that in, but sometimes you learn these tunes in a real kind of standard way. Like now, everybody plays it in C or Body and Soul. We always play in D flat. But if you go back to a lot of these early singing versions, they're in different keys, right? And so you learn them in different keys, which is always, it's helpful as a musician just to be able to move through keys on the same tune, but also how the key of the tune affects the mood of the tune.
Sure.
And so it's like, why do we always play Body and Soul in D flat? Like, why not play it in G or whatever? It's like, it might be more appropriate to the mood that you want to get across. So I always go back to Sinatra if I'm learning a tune, typically, not only to get his interpretation, but maybe also a different key.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting he picked that song from that record because to me, Only the Lonely may be the greatest Sinatra record, bar none.
Yes.
And the fact that Lee Konitz is on it, there's a whole Tristano kind of thing going on there as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was a fun record. That was another record that was probably done in like 6 hours. We had not all played together as a quartet before, so yeah. I mean, Lee was amazing. I mean, he was one of those guys. You notice this with that generation. They play one note. It's like, oh yeah, it's like everything. It's all there. Sonically, it's poof, right to the center of the heart. And I remember on that date too, looking down and he had a towel in his horn while he was recording. I wasn't sure if he was aware that he had left it there or he was trying to get that sound. And I didn't say anything, and just let it be. And then I noticed a little later it was out of the horn, so maybe he had forgotten and left it in. But with it, that it was cool too. It's like those guys could do no wrong,
Yeah.
It always sounded good.
But don't you find it interesting that you've got this chunk of metal, right? And you can tell Coltrane from Konitz to Barbieri in a note or two out of a chunk of metal.
Right. It's unbelievable. Yeah. And, I always think of that with the piano too, which is such a mechanical instrument, but you have two piano players sit at the same piano and get two different sounds. It's like, man, obviously it's here, bass, electric instruments are, unique on that too, because so much of it's coming from the electricity going in, but, guitar, electric bass, it's like, man, unbelievable. Yeah. So that's the beauty of music though, right? It's made up of individuals and personalities that change the way we think about that instrument.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Tom.
So last but not least, hopefully, we can get through this pandemic, hopefully in 2021. What does the future hold for you, Larry?
Well, we're all hopeful. So, I mean, I have a tour in Europe with Brad in May scheduled. So we're going to see if we're able to do it. I'm hoping, in May and then in July. So, I'm just kind of hoping that everybody feels comfortable getting back into a concert situation. Or whatever it is, and I think it's going to happen, of course. But, I just look, being optimistic at this point because I'm ready to go play, even though I am enjoying my time at home. But I want to get out there and get my calluses better. They are getting a little soft.
Yeah.
Any future collaborations that you're looking forward to, or?
That's a good question. I don't know. Everything's been on such hold,
Yeah.
waiting to see what develops. I mean, I was doing quite a few solo gigs before this all started, so I kind of want to continue that a bit more and experiment with that and get more comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
There's just I want to play with my friends again, and just see what develops. And for me, also recording is such a great thing, so I want to continue to just explore different ways to get the sound right in the studio, and if we practice all this time at home, then we want to be able to get into the studio and have it captured on tape still, and it's a big deal, it's not just like standing in front of a mic and playing. There's so many things that go into it. So that to me is a continuing, the learning curve is huge on that. So I look forward to more moments of that.
Well, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure talking to you, and I love how much you know. I really do. It's fabulous going all the way back and such. It's wonderful. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Appreciate the time. Yeah, it's fun to talk.
Great.